Welcome to the show today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning back in. We are coming to you from Washington, D.C. once again for the March for Life of 2023, which is significant and important as the first March for Life since the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And of course, as you know, the March for Life was always planned around the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, which would have been the 50th anniversary this week. But we won't be celebrating the 50th anniversary of that wicked decision. Actually, I feel like we need a new March for Life date. I think it should be June 24th, if you ask me, to celebrate the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Maybe someone will do that. We have on the show today my good friend and only person to have guest hosted this podcast, actually, AJ Hurley, formerly the director of Survivors Los Angeles, and now the director of activism at Live Action, our friend Lila Rose's organization, of course, the digital leader of the pro-life movement. And so AJ and I are good friends, and we have long respected and valued the work that he's done to mobilize people actually in the public square and outside the doors of death, and sharing some of the most disturbing, dystopic, demonic elements of the culture of death in this moment. And that has a lot to do with aborted baby harvesting and baby body parts trafficking and fetal organ harvesting, and how late-term abortions are performed to harvest the body parts of children for experimentation and profit. And AJ shared a lot of that on the podcast that he guest hosted. Everything you need to know about fetal organ trafficking and harvesting. So, of course, AJ is with us here in DC this week for the March for Life, and to try to find some Moloch serviles and do a little poking them in the eye and prodding and trying to bring out the inner demon, if you will, to make a public spectacle of them and their ideas. Their ideas which should be ridiculed, which should be laughed at and laughed out of the public square in reasonable discourse. And that's much of the culture that we're trying to build at the White Rose Resistance, and I think needs to be the next chapter of the culture and courage of the pro-life movement in this post-Roe moment. So buckle up, you're in for a treat with AJ Hurley. I'm Seth Gruber, and this is Unaborted. AJ, welcome to the show, brother.
Dude, thanks for having me, buddy.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Well, it's fun because I've had you on like twice digitally.
Yep.
And then I had you guest host an episode in person when I was out of town.
Which was awesome. Thank you for
But
that.
then we never actually did a recording in person, which just struck
Very
me.
strange.
It's kind of strange. So
Yeah.
yeah. So anyways, bro, well, it's good to be here with you. A lot has changed. It seems like the culture wars have sped up and heated up at almost an unprecedented rate. And it's felt like that since, I mean, one could argue since Obergefell, one could argue since March of 2020 when they shut down the country for a fake scamdemic.
For sure.
But it feels faster and hotter maybe than ever, which is saying something because it already has felt like that. And I feel like we're almost past the Rubicon line, which for people, that means the point of no return,
Totally.
Culturally, politically. And now, last week, the Republicans in the House proposed the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act again, which is a very simple piece of legislation. We just talked about it on the show with abortion survivor Sarah Zagorski, but Ben Sass was the one that revived it in 2019. Yeah. And it was an improved version of Bush's Born Alive Infant Protection Act, but with teeth.
Yep.
And all it says is if the baby's born alive during a botched abortion, you must care for the baby, give them proper medical care, transfer them to a hospital, and give them the same level of medical and treatment and care as any other baby would receive, born at the same gestational age under normal circumstances. Yeah. And if you don't care for that baby, then there are legal consequences, right? There's teeth to the legislation for the abortionists and the abortion staff workers that don't report the fact that a baby was born alive during a botched failed abortion, or who neglect to care for that child. Okay, that's pretty basic. Every Republican in the House votes for it. Every Democrat but one votes against it.
Disgusting.
The same thing virtually happened in 2019 and 2020. Pelosi vetoed the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, AJ, I believe over 70 times from when Sass proposed it, sponsored it in 2019, to when it kind of breathed its last attempts in 2020 or 2021. So the Democrat Party is being very clear. they want to expand the ideology that makes abortion reasonable in the first place after birth as well. So just, I mean, one examples of many, but the reason why I love you, brother, and I love the work you do is because we talk a lot about ideas on this show. You know, I talk a lot about ideas because I'm a speaker. And so I'm trying to use speech to mobilize and awaken people. But for this, a lot of this is far more physical and fleshly for you. There's a lot more flesh to these ideas for you. It's not just ideological. You have made choices and decisions in your life to live in accordance with those ideas and truth that have actually yielded a lot of pain, trauma, sorrow, and consequences for you and your family. Yeah. So for maybe people who are new to the show, or maybe people who miss some episodes with you, tell us a little bit about yourself. Yeah. The work you've done with survivors first, before we get to where you're at now, because I think a lot of people just heard you on the podcast, but don't actually know a lot of your history and what you do.
Yeah. So thanks, man. So what's unique, I think, about me as a pro-life activist is I have a unique background. Like, not a lot of people that are in this movement have a medical background where they've actually worked with babies, right? And that's kind of what sparked this whole thing with me. And this love for the unborn.
So how did you get into that? Tell that story.
So I did my undergraduate. I studied biological sciences. And then I did an extra 2 years after my biology degree in respiratory care. So I became a respiratory care practitioner.
Caring for preemies.
Premature and also pediatrics. So so I was putting these little children on ventilators. And
what ages?
At UCLA, they take care of ages from 22 weeks up, right? So and so 21 weeks is like the cutoff that they've ever been able to save a child, right? So
youngest baby ever born and survived 21 weeks in one day.
Yes, I believe so. Yeah. And so, anything from 21 weeks on, we're trying to save then. And so I'm looking at these children whom we are putting all of our time, all of our resources, all of our energy into saving these little children. And at UCLA, which is part of this network of UCs that are literally taking the organs of children from their abortions and using them for fetal organ trafficking, right? So and I didn't even know this at the time. I had no clue. I was working at this institution where I'm putting 21, 22, 23, 24-week-old gestational children, premature babies, on ventilators, trying desperately to save their lives. And across the hall, in another area that I don't even know where it is, they were literally dismembered 24-week-old children, dismembering them limb from limb, taking their life-giving organs, and then selecting them into their research programs and using their organs for fetal tissue research, government-funded, tax-funded NIH government research projects. So,
and AJ, what's the difference between the child born at 22 weeks that the hospital is working heroically to save, and the child at 24 weeks in the separate wing of the same addressed building that the hospital is actively working to dismember and dissect? What's the difference between those two children, AJ?
The only difference, brother, is one thing: a mere fiat decision of which one is valuable and which one isn't.
That's right. One is wanted and one is unwanted.
Yeah.
One is Lebensinwertensleben, life unworthy of life, to quote the Nazis. That's how they describe the Jews.
Yeah.
And one is very much wanted.
Yeah, brother. And that.
So when did you come to the realization that the hospital you were working in, as a nurse, am I right?
As a respiratory therapist,
was killing children at the same gestational age and older, and then working to heroically save babies at the same gestational age?
It wasn't until after I started getting involved in the pro-life movement. So I'm looking at these children and I'm like, wow, this baby should be in a womb for another 3 months, you know? And I'm looking at this child and I'm saying, I'm going to put you on a ventilator for another 3 weeks and we can still dismember you. legally.
Wild. Yeah.
Right? I'm looking at this precious image of God, and I'm realizing that my government and down the hall, my institution I'm working for, my employer, is taking the arms and legs of these children, and they're literally pulling these arms and legs off, pain capable at 12 weeks, right? Pain capable, viable children organs, they need their organs for these research projects. What does that say? I mean, if you want to say this isn't a child, this isn't a human being, but also
we're very carefully titling the names of the human organs that we want to harvest. But it's not a human. Oh, yeah. It's not a person. Exactly. But we just have very human terms for the organs that we want to profit off of selling.
and definitionally, they have to be human in order for it to be a human thymus.
Yeah. Well, and of course, you and I all know that this conversation is stupid because we all know we're killing babies. Yes. Right? And that's why I'm over the conversation about trying to convince people that they're human beings. Mm-hmm. I don't care about that conversation anymore, AJ, because they all know they're human beings. I mean, you had Alan Guttmacher, the president of Planned Parenthood from the 70s, write on page 3 of his book, Life in the Making, regarding whether people knew when human life begins. AJ, he said, quote, "This all seems so simple and evident that it's hard to picture a time when it wasn't part of the common knowledge." So I don't care about that conversation. Faye Waddleton, the president of Planned Parenthood from the 80s or 90s, told Miss Magazine in a 1997 interview, she said, "I think we have deluded ourselves into believing that people don't know that abortion is killing. Yeah. So any pretense that abortion is not killing is a signal of our ambivalence, a signal that we cannot say, yes, it kills a fetus." So that conversation is stupid. Yeah. We should tuck that away with the tooth fairy. Totally. Nobody thinks that it's not a human being. Everybody knows it's a human being. The question of when human life begins only becomes difficult to answer when you want to start killing people. Yeah. Suddenly they go, "Oh, well, we don't really know. I mean, the science is really undisputed." It's like, yeah, only because you want to kill them and harvest their organs. Absolutely. But AJ, you are quite seasoned in this conversation, unfortunately, through personal experience. Well, and so given your personal experience, the reason why I want to talk about some of this with you is because even some of the listeners of this show, which I not so humbly think is one of the most educational pro-life podcasts, I'm tooting my own horn.
I agree.
But I work hard on it, but the reason I say this is even some informed pro-lifers are not aware of how grisly some of the practices are on the post-abortion end of things, right after the baby's been killed, or sometimes if they flip out alive. So because of what you just said, caring for these babies on respirators that are often at the same gestational age and sometimes younger than or older than babies being dissected for their organs. I want you to explain a little bit about how all of this works. Okay. Because and we have a very educational episode you did on my podcast explaining this, and you guys should go back and listen to that. But if you missed that, I think we called it Everything You Need to Know About Fetal Organ Harvesting. So you guys should go and listen to that. But give us kind of like you're talking to greenies. Okay. Like help us understand this side of the abortion industry, because it's kind of a behemoth in and of itself. Like, what are we talking about when we're talking about this? Like, how are they performing the abortions? Do they change how they do it? Are they getting consent from the mom? Yeah. What are the different ways they perform abortions? How do they make sure they keep the tissue unspoiled? Totally. Because they want intact, healthy organs after they slaughter the kid because they need to sell. Like, assume nobody knows how this works, because I think a lot of people don't. Yeah. It's so disturbing to think about.
So I'll start with how abortions are performed in this country. One of usually 3 ways, right? So you either get aborted via pill, a medication abortion. You get
RU486.
Yes, yeah, mifepristone, misoprostol, right? Yep. So, or you are a D&E is performed.
Dilation and evacuation. Yes. And how does that work?
Normally, in a first trimester abortion, it's usually and I'm speaking in generality, so there's always outliers here. Sometimes they'll do pill abortions, and
D&C would be the next abortion after an abortion pill, right?
Yes. So let me first go first trimester. First trimester, it would be a pill abortion or a D&C. So, and obviously sometimes they'll do a pill abortion into the second trimester. That's very dangerous, but sometimes it happens. Yeah. We're going to see a lot more of that. Maybe we'll get into the pill abortion and everything that's happening. So It's a pill abortion and a DNC. So dilation and curettage. What happens is they dilate the cervix. They go in and they scrape out with the curette. They will just scrape out the
section first.
Well, they will first cut the child out with a curette, and then they'll take a vacuum aspirator and suction out all the product of conception, which is a cute little euphemism for a baby, right? Yeah. And so that goes up to the first trimester, second and third trimester. Anything past the first trimester into the second or third is labeled as late term, considered a late term abortion. And that they will do one of two ways. They will either, generally speaking, there's outliers there too, but DNE, dilation and evacuation, or they will do a labor induction abortion.
And dilation and evacuation, explain that.
Just like a DNC, excuse me. However, the baby is much larger now, so they will dilate. What they'll use is
no suction vacuum here. This is all forceps.
Yes. So what they will do is they'll put a laminaria. So it's a type of seaweed that they use. They'll stick up to 20 laminaria, sometimes even, usually 10 to 15 laminaria into a woman's cervix to dilate it. It swells up, and then they will basically have a big gaping hole that they can stick surgical instruments into. They will take some forceps or sulfur clamp, and they will pull off the arms and legs. They will crush the skull. And then they will. And
when the white paste begins to flow, you know that you've crushed the baby's brains.
Yes.
And it's funny when I describe abortion. Sometimes AJ, I'll say dissecting or dismembering the baby or tearing their limbs off. Mm. And one of the things that pro-choice advocates love to always say is fake news. Right? Yeah. They love to say that doesn't happen. That's not how abortions happen. Mm. Well, correct. It's not how the majority happen, because 90% of abortions are performed in the first trimester. Yes. So the majority would be the abortion pill or a DNC. Mm-hmm. But when you kill roughly 1 million babies a year in the United States, small percentages represent very large numbers, don't they?
Totally.
So
10,000, 20,000
oh, yes, or
late-term abortions every single year.
Yeah,
I mean, think about that. I mean, the 9/11 was 3,000.
Well, if I have my numbers correct, AJ, there are roughly 12,000 abortions each year after 21 weeks. But the second trimester doesn't begin at 21 weeks. Mm. Right? Yeah. The second trimester would begin at 13 weeks. 13 weeks. So that's just 12,000 roughly babies killed a year that are documented at a particularly grisly stage, 21 weeks. Yeah. That still leaves everything from 13 to 21 weeks. So we're talking about tens of thousands of babies being killed in this way, where you're dilating the cervix with seaweed, and then you're ripping arms and legs off. So, but it's so funny to always see the reaction of pro-abortion supporters when you describe abortions after that 13-week stage. They don't like it when I use the words dissecting, dismembering, and disemboweling. Why? Because those terms are very humanizing. Yeah. And that's the last thing they can have is any humanizing language about the victims.
Absolutely.
But so we've got dilation and evacuation now that's happening usually after around 13 or post 13 weeks. But what if we're like at 24, 23 weeks?
Well, yeah. So a labor induction will be the next one. So what they'll do instead, they will dilate, but here they will actually dilate the woman up to a day or two. They'll insert the laminaria, send her home to dilate for a day or two, and then they will bring her back in and then induce labor. So they'll give her large doses of misoprostol, a drug called misoprostol. But by the way, you hope that the baby doesn't come out alive.
Doesn't fall out while she's dilating at home.
Yes, or
they send her to a hotel,
or that the baby doesn't come out alive. So what's a lot of times? So there's a few drugs. What the most common is a drug called digoxin that they give. So when they are dilating the woman, the first day she comes in, they're putting the seaweed in, and then before they send her home, they take a long needle through her abdomen into the fetus.
The skull or the heart, I believe.
Yeah, if they can. Anywhere in the child, they'll aim for the chest if they can, or the head. But this drug digoxin will stop the baby's heart.
Or potassium chloride. They go back and forth, but digoxin's more common.
So potassium chloride technically can only be given in a hospital setting because it's incredibly dangerous. So it causes cardiac arrest in women. If they don't hit the child, the chances of actually killing a mother are incredibly high. So the protocols say that they should only be giving KCl or potassium chloride in the hospital setting.
Yep. Now, what happens, AJ, if they inject digoxin into the baby in the 3rd trimester or late 2nd trimester? Mom comes back after 24, 36, or 48 hours for the abortion, and the baby's still alive.
So hopefully, and under ideal circumstances, they do this under ultrasound guidance. But what we know, and what I have the unique, I won't say a privilege, a unique tragedy of finding out is being one of the people that's held the victims of partial birth abortion and babies that have, upon all prima facie evidence, have been born alive. And this happens all the time, brother, because there is zero accountability. There's zero oversight. Yep. And these abortions...
And anytime pro-lifers try to do an investigation, Planned Parenthood just trots out to a friendly judge and blocks any investigation into the abortion industry.
And if people... This sounds crazy. When we hear you and I talk like this, it's common knowledge to us because we're in the know. It sounds crazy until you actually look at the bills that they pass. When you look at Prop 1 in California, that protects an abortionist and the mother, who a baby born alive, and they do nothing to assist in that. The legislation now written into states like California, states like Michigan,
Vermont.
I think it's Maryland, Colorado, Vermont.
Perinatal. Talk about what that means, AJ.
Yes.
And why the Democrats in these various pro-abortion states, this is important, I want you to educate us, why they were so insistent on keeping the word perinatal
yes.
in these various state legislations, state laws that were intended to protect abortion through point of birth. But why were they so hung up post-Roe on putting the word perinatal into the law?
So think about
Because I've been told that the Democrats, they're just for abortion, AJ. But come on, they're not like Peter Singer, like Moloch infanticidal crazies, right?
Man, it is deplorable when you realize. So I'm looking at, and we'll probably get into Justice for the Five, and the fact that I'm looking at a child who has been induced into labor, that is sitting in the amniotic sac. How do you kill a child? How is a child not born alive if it's sitting in the amniotic sac completely unadulterated? So you deliver this child out, let it die on an operating table, most likely, and the amniotic sac is not punctured. So what that tells me is you've never given a needle to kill.
Because that would have punctured the
amniotic sac. And you didn't dismember this child in the womb. Right? So we catch you red-handed. We catch you. The smoking gun is a child fully in its amniotic sac. And we bring the evidence to the police. It takes them not even a full work day to say, no crimes committed, no investigation will be performed, and no autopsy.
So I want you to tell your story in a second, because I don't think I had you tell a part of it, but I don't think I ever had you tell the whole thing. But what is it with this word perinatal?
Sure.
Why are they hung up on it, and how does that play? Why is that a puzzle piece?
And I'm glad we prefaced this question for me actually describing the abortion process, because think about this. If you put 15 laminaria in a woman's cervix and then send her home,
what does that do?
Or you send her to a hotel. States like California now have become destination locations where they're funding through taxpayer dollars, funding abortion. And we're sending these women, pregnant women, to these places on abortion vacations, fully funded by the taxpayer, hotels, everything.
Yep.
You load this woman up for her cervix to dilate, and then you send her to a hotel room for a day or two. What happens at that point? If you don't give digoxin because how expensive it is, and you're a profiteer, you send her, and the baby, you overdilate her a little bit too much, and the baby comes out. And
by the way, we have stories of this happen. So what AJ is saying, guys, this is not like, this is a very important conversation, because like you're hearing, guys, let's call it the breaking edges of the culture of death. As if slaughtering babies in the womb just for profit wasn't bad enough. Sure. This is where the abortion industry is going. It's where it's how it's transforming. It's how it's molding. And we have stories of women this has happened to, right? Who are pro-life and are kind of blowing the trumpet now. And of investigations that sometimes the court documents get released and we can actually read about what happened with various criminal investigations. But this happens, guys, okay? Yes. This happens. Women give birth while waiting in a hotel room before they're supposed to return back to the abortion clinic for the finalizing of the late-term abortion, because they were overdilated and the baby fell out. Yes. Sorry, baby falls out,
or even you start inducing an extramural delivery happens. Like, right, there's the chances of a baby coming out when you don't want it to, and when you're not ready for it. And so we're seeing with the David Daleiden stuff, the videos that come out. This happens. And even in the protections in place with the Born Alive Infant Protection Act, my critique of that was, one, there is no enforcement mechanism, which is problematic. But even there's a clause in there that says, if you don't intend to. So if I accidentally give too much misoprostol and this child comes out, I didn't intend for the baby. All you have to do is just say in your notes, I didn't intend to do this abortion.
So you're talking about some of the results of these late-term abortions and the ways they perform them.
What's the perinatal phrase? So this child comes out, and then all of a sudden you're in a predicament, because this woman now has a child that she doesn't want that is now outside of the womb and alive. Okay. And the abortionist wants to cover his rear end from any criminal or civil liabilities for telling a woman, don't do anything, flush it down the toilet or throw it away. A live child. Who gets sued at that point, or who gets criminally prosecuted? So we literally have legalized infanticide in states like California, states like Colorado, and states like Michigan.
Now, you may have read the legislation closer than I did, AJ, so correct me if I'm wrong, but here's my understanding. In particular with the California legislation, and my guess is the other states kind of just copy and pasted something similar, is it was preventing investigations. So Prop 1 in California, for example, that wrote abortion through point of birth into the California state constitution. But they had this hang up with Prop 1 with perinatal.
Yes.
That they were also pushing in AB 2223, which did that go through, by the way?
It did go through.
Yeah. And so, and by the way, if you guys are in California, you'll remember AB 2223 brought Pastor Jack Hibbs and all these wonderful other pastors, and I believe thousands of God-fearing pro-life Californians to the state capitol to protest this. But they snuck this in. And so it would prevent investigations into the death of a child through abortion, miscarriage, and then it said, or perinatal death.
Yes.
And then you go look up the term perinatal, and it could refer to a baby up to 28 days after birth. And so now, now we start to understand why they were so focused on getting that in there, because they don't want to be prosecuted or be liable for babies that they know are going to die after birth.
Yeah. So
now where does organ trafficking and fetal tissue research, where does that play a role in this conversation in regards to their political and financial incentives, but also into their political strategizing in covering their butt. Like where does that conversation enter this?
So it's interesting because the last time we were able to talk about field trafficking, it was before Dobbs, right? So now we're after Dobbs. We're after the legislation that's gone through with all these states. And now in states like California and all the ones that we've been discussing, now you can kill a baby up to birth. And so what does this do now to change the laws?
Well, and to be clear and to be fair, you already could in those states. You just needed to claim that the abortion was severely impacting your emotional health.
Sure.
And you could still get the approval from the abortionist, but it's just easier now.
But but many of the contracts for these fetal organ, they have to be elective abortions. With free from fetal or abnormalities or anything. And this you doubt me on this, just go research the studies that we published. And it literally spells out 24-week-old gestational child free from abnormalities from elective abortions. So we're not hiding anything. It's not conspiracy theorists. This is just public knowledge. So in reference to this now, because of this post-Roe, post-Dobbs, now constitutional amendment protected activity through abortion all the way to the day of birth, we're most likely going to be seeing a lot more studies coming out to third trimester children. Brains, I mean, now they don't have to hide any of these things, right? Before it was like, how are you getting this type of research projects on how are you getting brains, without a partial birth abortion, without these things? So
one of the most shocking discoveries I made a while back researching this, AJ, and you and I have talked about this. So maybe touch on this for our listeners. Some abortionists don't use digoxin when they're performing late-term abortions because it can spoil the tissue.
Yes.
It can spoil, the body parts of the child and organs that they can profit off of obtaining and selling. Am I right?
Yeah. So that was the other thing I was going to say about this. So the abortion industry profits in really at least three ways. They profit off of the abortion themselves, right? So they charge money for the abortion. They profit off of us federally funding abortion through our tax, pay your dollars. So we fund just Planned Parenthood to exist. We give them so many millions of dollars a year. I forgot the stats off the top of my head. And then after it's all done, they profit from us off of selling the organs of the babies that they charge the women to have the abortions. Then on the back end, they profit. Now we found out through people like David Daleiden and his amazing undercover journalism, that they are profiting off of the sale of the baby body parts after the fact. Right. So we federally subsidize abortion. They charge these women thousands of dollars.
Oh, by the way, they can make 2 to 3 times on an abortion if it's being financed through the state.
Sure.
They can get a lot more money off of killing a child if it's a poor patient who can't afford to pay cash.
Absolutely. Yeah, because there's federal subsidies, everything kick in, right? So, and then they get paid on the back end selling these organs to research grants that are federally funded.
Yep.
So we are subsidizing these federally funded. So the question now is, why in the heck would they need organs of children for research? What's the deal? Why do they need the organs of these babies? So Regeneron is a company that everybody probably knows because Regeneron is one of the companies that produced a pharmaceutical, tons of pharmaceutical drugs, but vaccines and everything. So Regeneron, there is a guy, I think his name is George Yiannopoulos. He's one of the CEOs of Regeneron, but he patented a technology because human trials are complicated. You have to use humans, and these are experimental drugs. So it can be very dangerous and can be very costly and time consuming. So, but what if you could get an animal to behave like a human? Well, how do you get an animal to behave like a human? Because they have a completely different immune system. And the things that work on animals don't always work in humans. So what if we could nuke the immune system of a lab mouse and then graft human organs onto that lab mouse? And then test all of our research and development now on these humanized mice. So the term humanized mice is one you probably were familiar with if you have paid any attention during COVID. And these humanized mice trials are now all over the place. And Yoncopoulos and Regeneron made billions of dollars on the patents alone that they got. They partnered with Gates and Yale to develop this technology that destroys the natural immune system of a mouse or a lab rat, so that it accepts the human organs. It would normally reject them. Now it accepts, we can graft cells and graft organs of livers and thymuses from these lab mouse and lab rats, graft them onto lab mice. And now we test our vaccine, we test our pharmaceutical drugs, and the mice behave exactly in the same manner that a human would.
Which is why I call Fauci the Joseph Mengele of this generation. And my listeners to this podcast have heard me go into detail about Fauci and Francis Collins' funding of the University of Pittsburgh and some of the humanized mice trials that go on there, and the scalping of babies' heads killed through late-term abortions, and then the infant human hair that grows on the back of the rat.
Yes.
But they've done other organs attached to the lab rat, not just the scalps of babies.
Sure.
Inserted subcutaneously on lab rats, if I recall. And Judicial Watch also exposed this. Yeah. And we have the pictures. We have pictures of rats with infant human hair growing on their back.
Publicly released. All from.
So what AJ is saying, guys, is you got to get the baby body parts. Yeah. Right? That's what you're saying?
Exactly. And so the problem when it comes with ethics here, and I use that term ethics loosely, right? Because we're defining ethics not in the biblical sense, because we would just say all of this is pure demonic evil, right? But by their own standards, by the standards of you shouldn't have a baby come out alive. And if you can kill it in the womb, but if it comes out alive, then that's unethical. By their own standards, you can't use the drug that stops the baby's heart so it doesn't come out alive, because that same drug, whether it's lidocaine, whether it's digoxin, or whether it's KCL, nukes the stem cells, destroys the stem cells of the tissues and the organs that we need to acquire for our research projects. So the question now is, how are they doing it? If we know, like for instance, the skull, right? So we know they have skulls. They're growing, they're putting skulls on mice, and they're growing baby hair on these mice. So the question is, how are you doing this without a partial birth abortion? Because if we do a D&E, you're going to crush the skull and you can't use a usable skull, right? But if you do a labor induction, you have to give digoxin, and then you fry the stem cells that you need. So how are you doing this legally without these babies being born alive?
I see. So what you're saying is the fact that they're obtaining healthy, intact fetal organs is proof positive that the way in which they're obtaining them is itself illegal. That's what you're saying. If I understood what you were saying.
Would suggest.
Yeah. Yes. I have the research. We can pull it up on a different podcast if anyone emails or asks it. And I have the research, and I have the study and the date where the FDA admitted that it was the Society for Family Planning. Yes. That if you use digoxin, if you don't use digoxin in a labor induction procedure, there's a 50% chance that the baby will come out alive before they're killed in the womb. So if the Society for Family Planning, a pro-abortion organization, guys,
pro-abortion, totally
is admitting this,
exactly.
and I covered this like a year and a half or something ago. If you guys ask for it, I have it all archived. Then we have to ask the question, AJ, why aren't we hearing reports?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Because you would be required to report that, right? A baby born alive. And then if it is happening and we're not hearing reports about it,
sure,
then why are we not hearing reports about it? Oh, because you're killing them.
Yes. Yes.
So now, AJ, if we're following the science in our conversation together, and we have evidence from pro-abortion organizations admitting the data we just gave, then we're very reasonably positioned to assume or to know that they are dissecting and cutting up babies while they're alive after they've been born. Am I correct, AJ?
When not only is this speculation through deductive reasoning, Seth, we have eyewitness testimony from Holly O'Donnell, which was a whistleblower from a company called ABR, I believe.
That's right.
Or Systemic Stress, one of the two.
Yeah.
And she was a tissue procurement officer.
Yeah.
She had the horrible job.
ABR, Advanced
Bioscience Resources. So she had the horrible job of being a middleman between the research institutions and the abortion facilities. So she would go to the abortion facility, acquire the organs of these children, and then go deliver them. So
what's her name again?
Holly O'Donnell.
Did they kill her?
I don't think so. No, she died. She died.
Oh, she did?
Yeah, she did die. Yeah.
Oh, but this was recent.
No. She's been dead for quite some time.
Oh, okay.
Now,
but so she's an older whistleblower.
She's an older whistleblower.
So what did she say happened?
So she went online and totally testified that she looked at hearts beating in petri dishes that had just been executed.
Yep. So there you go.
So and they.
But I'm sure, AJ, that was probably like a super rare. It was probably like a super isolated case, just like the babies that you unpacked from boxes from the Washington D.C. Surgery Center with their heads collapsed in. I'm sure that was also just. It was probably just a total isolated one. I mean, how many times does this have to happen, right?
And every time this happens, Seth, whether it's David Daleiden giving this eyewitness testimony, giving the undercover footage, or whether it's Teresa Bukovac and Lauren Handy and myself delivering a box of children over to the DC police, that skulls snipped in classic partial birth abortion fashion, in whole intact in-call children in the amniotic sac, catching them red-handed, what happens?
Nothing.
The pro-abortion establishment runs cover for big abortion and then ends
Lauren.
up prosecuting the very people that exposed it.
Yeah.
Now, David Daleiden is facing 10 felonies. Lauren gets charged with a felony. They start coming after me. It's like clockwork.
Yep.
You catch them red-handed and you expose big abortion.
Yep.
And then they run cover for these horribly wicked people. And
I'm trying very hard right now not to start talking about the Christian leaders and pastors who we were told to respect by their books and share them with relatives who all vote for the very party that is behind this and give spiritual license to their congregation to do so. Because if they weren't doing that, we might actually have an evangelicalism in America that actually stands shoulder to shoulder with people like you, AJ, and doesn't allow this to happen. Yeah. But I don't want to go there right now. We are short on time. But I do want to talk and have you share a little bit about your story.
Sure.
So we've talked a lot about what's happening. So you guys are listening to like some of the stuff that we know happens in the abortion industry. Let me briefly say why this is wrong. I think sometimes when we have these moral conversations, AJ, we have what the philosopher Leon Kass called the wisdom of repugnance. There's a wisdom to repugnance, meaning you see something or you hear something that is so obviously evil that you immediately go, oh,
yeah.
It's that repugnant response you have. And there's a wisdom to that. And your neurons might not be firing to the extent that you can give a philosophical explanation as to why, but you still go, I don't know, man, but that's wicked.
That's wrong.
So there's a wisdom to that. But I think some people struggle with giving just really clear language as to why it's wrong. So there are 4 reasons why fetal organ harvesting or fetal tissue research is wrong. 1, you have to kill the baby to get their parts. You have to kill the baby to get their parts. So without killing them, the fetal organ harvesting doesn't happen. So that's obviously wrong. Secondly, it's wrong because it makes you an accomplice to the crime after the fact. It makes you an accomplice to the crime after the fact. I want you to imagine for a second, guys, that a hospital becomes the beneficiary of a gang of killers that provides it with fresh cadavers. But don't worry, the hospital's not killing any of these innocent victims. It's the gangs that are doing it, but then they bring the cadavers to the hospital so the hospital can perform experiments on cadavers and use them for scientific research and medical purposes. Would anyone see a problem with the hospital continuing relationship with the gang of killers? I think so.
I hope so.
But hey, they didn't do the killing. It was those guys. No, we would say that makes you an accomplice of the crime after the fact, right? By the way, guess what? Many of the Nazi doctors argued at Nuremberg. Many of the Nazi doctors argued that they did not kill the Jews. They were just performing experiments on their brains. It was the Nazis that killed the Jews. And yet we didn't accept their justification and reasoning in Nuremberg. Totally. We rejected it because it made them an accomplice to the crime after the fact. And did you know this, AJ? There is hardly a medical journal today in existence that will publish the results of the Nazi experimentations because of the nature of the crimes committed. Wow. The second reason it's wrong. Third reason it's wrong is it creates an evil market for the evil means. Right? And we just talked about this. The first, the abortion industry profits off of killing the child. And then they build an additional market off of selling the baby body parts of the children they killed, which they wouldn't have had in the first place had they not killed the child. So it creates an evil market for the evil means. And fourthly, it communicates, AJ, that abortion could be a moral good or have a redemptive quality to it. And that is wicked. Demonic. Now, I might have told you this one time, but I don't know. There's a study from the University of Toronto from I don't have it committed to memory. It's from the 1990s, and I'll get the date. But I've shared it on Unaborted before. There's a study from the University of Toronto a couple decades ago that actually asked the question of women if they would be more likely to choose abortion if they knew and were informed that the tissue and organs would be donated to medical use. So we have this study from the University of Toronto interviewing women, AJ, who were already inclined to abort, and then asking them, would you be more likely or less likely to abort if you were told that the remains could be donated to scientific advancement and medical use? Bro, 17% of the women said they would be more likely to abort. The women said that they'd be 17 times more likely. So what does that mean? Apply that to American figures at pushing 1 million abortions a year, right? Increase that by 17%. And that's an astronomical increase in the number of abortions. So it communicates to women, hey, you can redeem your immoral act. You're planning on killing your baby? You should definitely do it because we'll donate the pieces of your child to help the born, right? So those are the 4 reasons why it's wrong. And I think we should be clear on that. We should be able to explain that and speak to that. But this is so real to you because you actually have been fighting this stuff and you've held the victim. So as we just wind down, because some people might not have heard your story, what happened last year?
Before I go there, can I actually add one addendum to that?
Yeah.
What's even more crazy about that is the second point you made, that the hospitals themselves are accomplices. Not only the hospitals, Seth, but you and I. The American people are accomplices. Because who pays for the federally funded research projects?
Yeah, that's right.
The taxpayer.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but on the day of judgment, there will be a reckoning, brother. And I will be held accountable for every last, if I'm held accountable for every thoughtless word, for every intention of my heart, how much more will I be held accountable the fact that I did nothing in the face of my government taking my taxpayer dollars and forcing me to pay for the organs of pain-capable, viable children being put on lab rats in the name of healthcare.
Yep.
And be at the very surface of all this, the baseline understanding of this is this notion. And because a lot of people listening could ask this question, like, what is the motive, AJ? Why in the world would they do this? And it's the same old lie, Seth, that we have believed for thousands and thousands of years.
Ye shall be as gods.
Yes. And when you look at pagan nations, the lore was this: give us your babies, throw your babies to the molten arms of Moloch, and in exchange, we'll make you healthy. Your crops will grow. You'll have financial success.
Yep.
What is the lore? The same lore. Give us your children. Fund research. Fund federally taxpayer funded research projects through the NIH. And in doing so, we'll give you a vaccine. We'll let you live longer. We'll cure your Parkinson's drug. We'll give you the fountain of pharmaceutical youth if you will just but deliver the organs of your your children to.
And a lot of people, as you don't remember how hard the Democrats pushed and continue to push for embryonic stem cell research. Even before fetal organ harvesting was quite the behemoth that it is today. Yeah. It was embryonic stem cell research. That was the big golden calf then. So this is nothing new. And what you're saying is well, it's obviously true, but it's also a feature of quote unquote progressivism, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because child killing to ancient pagan deities to improve your own life is not new. It's a very ancient idea. Yeah. So progressivism isn't progressive, it's regressive.
Yeah.
Their ideas are not more modern, but more ancient than the revolutionary founding fathers of America. But here's the point. Today, that machine is more finely tuned and effective than it ever was under the Canaanites.
Absolutely.
Or the Aztecs.
Same deities, same demons being worshipped, new sophisticated.
But AJ, I mean, I was told J.D. Greer, he's a great guy and he's a registered Democrat. And Tim Keller, I mean, come on, he loves the Lord and he's a registered Democrat. And Russell Moore, he's a great guy and he's a registered Democrat. So there must be room in Big Eva. And isn't Christianity a big tent, AJ? It's a big tent. Aren't you? I mean, don't you want more people in the Christianity tent? And so I mean, what's wrong with those guys? I mean, are you saying that you're more righteous and that they're wrong? Because they love God and they've been used by God, AJ. And so we should read Rick Warren's book and we should buy Purpose Driven Life. I mean, what do we say, AJ, to these? I mean, obviously I'm being a little bit. Sure. What do we say to these kind of men who are all registered Democrats who tell their congregations that they have spiritual license to vote for the very people behind everything we just talked about?
Yeah. That justification would have worked maybe for me in the 50s or 60s, right? When you had JFK type of liberals, right? But when last week there was one Democrat out of 250 or just under, one that says no to a bill that protects children being born alive. Every single one, except for one, says, I think those babies don't deserve any protection. I'm sorry. But I can no longer look at a pastor and say, you are not complicit in the dismembering and destruction of little image bearers of God, and that you are not a voice for righteousness in society, or that I'm sorry, but you've utterly lost any moral high ground to call yourself a pastor if you stand for this.
I sometimes say from pulpits, and you can see the congregation squirm when I say this, but I sometimes say, if I wonder if I could dump the monthly supply of mutilated children in that city on the doorstep leading into the office of that pastor that he has to walk through to get to his desk to prep his sermon Saturday night. I wonder if he would live a little differently. But the reason I said that is because you're the closest person I know who's actually dealt with the buckets of the very children that I'm talking about, they're hidden from sight, right? This is why Ephesians 5:11 says, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Because abortion, it's not an overstatement to say, is the most hidden injustice in world history. It's so clinical. It's so sterile. It's behind clean, perfume-smelling waiting rooms, and we rarely ever see the victims. What happened to you last year, AJ, has not happened in the pro-life movement for many, many years.
10 years at least.
Where pro-lifers were able to actually obtain bodies and bodies and bodies of the victims because the abortion industry works so hard to make sure that their victims are never seen. Yeah. We know that there would be millions of pro-choice moderates who vote for Democrats in this country who would immediately never vote for a pro-choice politician again, a pro-abortion politician again, if CNN and MSNBC and ABC and the New York Times and the Washington Post and NPR showed photos of the kind of babies that you held. So as we finish on this, long form dialogue, which I hope is helpful to people because it's very informative. Tell us what happened to you and your wife last year.
To answer that question, I'll just say this. Never mind the fact that pastors would no longer vote for pro-choice candidates if they had the mangled bodies of these children put in their doorstep. How about their wives waking up for a year now with nightmares because of looking and holding the images of these precious children in your arms? What if their wives, right? The unspeakable horror, brother, of holding these children. The unspeakable terror of holding the mangled image of God. That skull had been snipped by an abortionist and brutally murdered in demonic fashion. What that does to you as a man, not only holding them, but having to counsel and disciple and love your wife at 3 a.m. when she wakes up screaming. Because no human should have to endure that type of depravity.
Or have it done to them. Right.
Exactly. And this is, I'm just speaking as a person that's held these babies. I'm not speaking of the real tragedy here, the real horrible aspect, the real demonic stronghold that's gripped this nation is the fact that this is happening to 3,000 children every single day and nobody gives a rip about it. Meanwhile, our pastors are pumping woke platitudes from the pulpit every single day.
Or just focusing on their buildings, budgets, and baptisms.
Yes, and conveniently ignoring the real problem is that over 1,000 Black image bearers of God are being snuffed out every single day, and they don't even give a rip about it.
And they had the gall to march and declare that Black Lives Matter.
Yes, it is.
But what happened? Some people don't know your wife's story. What happened last year? Because some pro-lifers that I know don't even know the story.
Yeah.
Because unless you're really committed to self-government and educating yourself. That story was covered up by the activist media like nothing I've ever seen before. So some people never even heard about it.
March 25th, 2022, I got a phone call from two friends of mine.
And you were here in DC?
I was actually just outside of DC. I got a phone call, AJ, you need to come here immediately. I hopped on a train. I was there in a couple hours, and two friends of mine were outside of Washington Surgery Center, a late-term abortion clinic in DC here, kills to the day of birth. And they convinced a driver of a medical waste company that was going to this abortion clinic to pick up the bodies of the victims of these children that have been aborted there, was about to drive away to go burn these babies in a medical incinerator. And they approached this driver and said, hey, do you know what's in those boxes? This driver probably had no clue. I don't really know, but said no. And they said, that is a box of the children of this community in DC, Baltimore area. And he was blown away. He was visibly disturbed. They use this opportunity to say, can we give these babies a proper burial and dignity? Will you let us do that? And to their surprise, he said yes. They took a box, took it back to their house, called me. We opened the box, and inside the box, Seth, was 115 image bearers of God, 115 precious children. 110 of them were first to second trimester, and 5 of them were late term
third trimester
children. What's even more striking was the fact that when we opened the buckets that these children were in and held the children and visually inspected them, many of them had overwhelming evidence that they had been born alive and were victims of infanticide.
And we'll show some of those pictures right now, AJ. Yeah. So let's pause and show people these images.
And before you do that, I just want to show, don't look away. The reason why abortion happens is because we can talk about this issue out there. When you look at the images of these children, what you talked about, I forgot what terminology you said, the wisdom of repugnance. That is what's keeping this legal. If everybody saw what abortion was, this would end very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Abortion is the most demonic thing that you can ever do to an image bearer of God, and it has to end. Please do not look away and look at the images of what we call choice and what we call healthcare.
That's right. And we'll blow these up big right now for anyone watching on YouTube. And so these are our children that you unboxed, right?
Yes.
And that you actually held.
That is Christopher X.
And so tell us, as we show these, AJ, about the names of the 5 that were in the late term that launched the campaign.
Justice for the 5.
Justice for the 5.
This is Harriet. She was the one who had prima facie evidence of partial birth abortion. Her back of her skull was snipped in classic partial birth abortion fashion. That is on hell right there. Probably actually 28 weeks gestation, roughly, brutally dismembered in the womb. That's actually Harriet too. That's the same partial birth abortion victim. That's her also. But there was also Phoenix, which is a child that was born what's called in-call, still in the amniotic sac, that was most likely delivered alive and left to suffocate in her own amniotic fluid. And the last one was Harriet, third trimester child. Every single one of these, I can speak as a respiratory therapist, just looking upon these children, every single one of them most likely would have survived outside of the womb with little to no medical help at all.
Yeah. So as William Wilberforce would once say, you may choose to look the other way, but you can no longer say that you did not know. So if you're listening to this on an audio platform, we have the link in the show notes for the YouTube link. So you need to go look at these images. And you know what, AJ? They need to show them to their pro-choice friends.
Yep.
They should not even ask them. I'm sorry if that's not. If your friend or family member supports abortion, you should just walk up to them and say, especially if you're having a conversation on abortion, you should say, you have a moral and intellectual responsibility and obligation to view that which you support.
Yes.
And here it is.
Go to whatisabortion.com. Live Action has some of the best content.
Or abortionno.org, www.abortionno.org, that will actually show you abortion in progress footage, which is something that many of you won't be able to handle. But again, it's something that if the whole country saw, this narrative would be very different. So AJ and your wife, you unboxed and held these children. And the city that we're in right now, Washington, D.C., and her mayor, Muriel Bowser, which just seems so appropriately named. Like, it's Providence. Of course, her last name's Bowser. Refuses to perform any type of investigation.
No autopsies.
No autopsies to confirm whether this was partial birth abortions or not. And we all know why. Because they know it was. And they know that any investigation into what all Americans know to be disgusting will open up and swing the doors wide to the entire industry that only operates with the approval of the American populace because of ignorance. Now, not in every case, but in large cases, most Americans are ignorant about what's actually happening. And this was an important episode, AJ, to bring some light and truth to that ignorance.
Yeah, thank you, brother.
Any closing words?
I just, every week we'll have people come up to us, Seth, and they'll tell us that they saw the images of those babies and they changed their mind on abortion.
Wow.
That's how powerful the images of abortion are.
Yep.
So when you go through Holocaust Museum right down the road from here, they will have image after image of Holocaust victims, because a picture paints 1,000 words and a video.
Yep. AJ, I just had a Catholic high school, big one. I just spoke out last week. Deny me the request to show a 55-second abortion victim photography clip. And they said, it's just too much. And we don't want to harm your message, by turning people off by seeing this. Here's the problem. When pro-lifers do that, when they hide and cover up the victims, the abortion industry has a field day.
Oh, 100%.
They laugh and they mock us and they go, the people who say they're pro-life are doing our jobs for us. Which is what? What is the job of the abortion industry? To hide and cover up their crimes and make sure nobody sees their victims. And we do it for them. How stupid are we, AJ?
Yep.
I could tell you the names of some people who ought to know better in the pro-life movement, who publicly condemn the use of abortion imagery. They say, that's not the way. That's emotional manipulation. Yeah, go tell that to Emmett Till's mother.
Jeez, exactly.
Which is a story I've told before from stage. But until we start caring more about the lives of the unborn than the feelings of the born, none of this will change.
Yep.
So
the last thing I'll say is what's been unbelievably providential about this was the timing of this.
That's right.
A month or so before Roe gets overturned, God allows, for the first time ever, video content showing through video the images of abortion. But it's as if before God does this amazingly providential, gracious work that we don't deserve, overturning Roe v. Wade, our culture is in decline. Everything is just going headlong into sin and just outright rejecting the God who loves us and died to save and rescue and redeem us. We are following headlong after that, spitting God in the face as a culture. And God does this unbelievably gracious act to overturn Roe. But before he does...
And uses a mean tweeting orange man that big evangelicalism told us you were a bad Christian if you voted for.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
Unbelievable, right? Yeah. And God, he has a habit of doing these type of things.
Even John Piper,
right?
John Piper, bro,
yes.
even others like that, basically wrote pieces essentially saying, don't vote for Trump. He's a mean, tweening orange man. Mm-hmm. And isn't that, with everything you're saying, the providence of it and the man he chose to use, it adds a fascinating element to our pious evangelicalism in America.
Yeah, but before he did it, and this was the point, was that God gave America one last look to peel back the curtain and look straight into the abortion clinic waiting room of the woman in stirrups about to deliver her child over to the demons, and says, this is one last look of what you are doing as I'm graciously giving you one more chance.
Yep.
And
I only wish you could have been on Fox, and I wish they would have shown the images. Yeah. I wish more people would have had you on to tell the story and to show the pictures. So good work.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for coming on again, AJ. People love you and respect you because of your courage. And so I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. Please share this. If you have any questions, we refer to some data points we have archived. Reach out. We'll get those to you. We're AJ and I are going to try to find some Moloch serviles, some Baal worshipers, I think, this week, and try to poke them in the eye, try to poke and prod them. Seth, that's not very Christ-like or compassionate or nice. Yeah, maybe it's because you haven't read the Old Testament. Maybe it's because you've been reading too much Russell Moore and Tim Keller. Maybe you need to come into the real world where babies are murdered and get your panties more in a wad over murdered children than by my rhetoric. Yeah. There I am. I'm going on a tangent, brother. Well, thank you guys for tuning in today. Head on over to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. Leave the show rating and review. Share this widely, please. This will be on YouTube as well, where we show you the images of the children killed through choice. You can follow AJ on social media, and he's the new director of activism at Live Action as well. And to see my speaking schedule, to book me for an event, which is filling up quickly, you can go to sethgruber.com and leave the show rating and review. Would you let us know what you think? Click 5 stars. That helps us reach more people. Until next time, I'm Seth Gruber, and this is Unaborted.